Welcome to it, Beyond the Plinth, our show about everything biokinetics, health and wellness orientated. I'm your host, Steve Saunders, and with me as usual is...
It's Wendy Vermaak. I'm the marketing director for BASA, and I'm really excited, Steve. I have a special guest.
Very special guest.
A little bit flustered.
A couple of labels in front of his name.
What do we call you? Is it Prof? Where do we go?
I'll just give one label, and that's Habib Noorbhai. Absolute pleasure to be here.
Brilliant, Habib. Lovely to have you here.
Thank you.
We got some phenomenal topics to cover today. It's about the exploding world of technology and the application of biokinetics within that world. Wendy sent me a couple of links introducing me to you and your world. And there were all sorts of terms in there, which we're going to try and cover today as I get an education and we educate those listeners listening to the show about this field of technology and where it's going. Wendy, super exciting to do this. The first term I'm going to throw at you guys, because it's the overall umbrella term. I had to ask you this question just to understand what it meant. I just saw it labeled there and I had no clue what it meant. It was 4IR. Habib, what is 4IR?
So 4IR stands for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And for some, it's a buzzword. But for a lot of us working in the field, it's in actual fact something that's really revolutionized the way we work, the way we do things, and the way we interact on a digital and automated system.
Okay. So, give me a little bit of background firstly about Habib and where he's come from and how he's ended up here. And then I'm going to hand to Wendy to engage this within the field of biokinetics. Go for it.
Cool. So trained as a biokineticist and founded my love for academia and now working at the University of Johannesburg as an associate professor in sports science mainly, and also head up a healthcare technology research center.
Wow. That's why Wendy is a bit flustered today. Okay, I'm flustered now. Sure. Okay. And that's brought you into this field of dealing with the fourth industrial revolution, the technology, artificial intelligence and such. Like, handing over to Wendy, the application into biokinetics. You've mentioned sports science is where you seem to be working most of the time, but the plug into biokinetics is almost seamless between the two. The absolute need for biokinetics in the application to sports science is massive, but the application to education, to lecturing, to support, to development, all of it applies.
Yeah. So, I mean, for us, if I'm talking as a biokineticist on the ground, we rely, of course, on what the latest research is and what the academics are finding out for us. And this is to firstly equip and enable us to do a better job and help patients. But the development of this is far bigger than what we can ever expand within our own practices. So we rely heavily on what's going on with the academics and at the universities and the studies and so on. And it's just mind-blowing, really, to see what's passing out there. And I guess, just to describe to us why you think that this is a revolution. Why is the need there? How does this help our patients?
Very good question. So, we reside in an industry now, especially within healthcare professionals or just in healthcare, where data is a real commodity. And big data in itself, you can do so much with it. And that's really the fuel for these innovations. So when we're talking about the fourth industrial revolution, the main technological thread within that is artificial intelligence. And what artificial intelligence is, or AI, is anything that could be done by humans could now potentially be done robotically or automatedly using human intelligence. So it's not really a replacer, because you can't really replace a human being with normal human being skills. But what I rather call it is that it's the 3 E's. It's an extension, it's an enabler, and you're empowering someone to do things better, of quality.
I'm going to add a fourth one, equipping.
Of course.
Let's write an article.
So that's basically what it is. It's just to enhance the quality in what we do. And coming to the most important point within the healthcare professional domain, because the bread and butter or the fuel for this is data, with the POPI Act now and with everything that's going on, how do you manage patient data is really important. And what really, Wendy, from a biokinetics perspective, scope of practice and medical ethics 101 is really important when it comes to this data, because you're going to be having access to not just patient data, but also in terms of different types of data of how to manage certain things. And when I say that data is the fuel of these technologies, data is used in order to have different models for machine learning. And how machine learning works is you train a model using various forms of data, and can that be used or can that be enhanced in a certain way to assist patients? We can get into the specific examples at a later stage. But just to give an overview of what that technology is and how it's so important that we are careful in how we integrate 4IR and AR with biokinetics from a scope of practice perspective, from an ethics perspective. That's really important.
Another E.
And what we can and what we can't do.
Okay.
Sorry.
He keeps throwing so many topics at us, and I'm writing as fast as I can to get as much down as possible. But okay, give me an understanding then. AI as this machine learning mechanism applied to the patient, applied to the practitioner. What's the difference between those two in the application?
So from a patient's perspective, and I think that's something that we probably need to focus our lens more on, is that the patient is the priority, right? And coming back to the ethics now, the most important part of ethics is no harm being done to the patient. So first and foremost, as health professionals, we ensure no harm to patients. But I always say, if something is working, don't change it. Why change anything?
Yeah.
But the reality is that 4IR and machine learning can really optimize the way we work with patients. And with biokinetics, we have various forms of where we're working with it. It's either in orthopedics, it's either in chronic disease, it's either in wellness areas. And depending on those different sectors, it's how we could really optimize things for the patient, depending on what they're coming to us as biokineticists for. So coming from a practitioner perspective, COVID-19 really propelled the way we worked and the way we did things as biokineticists. I mean, Wendy, you just spoke about a third of your practice now, changing a bit. But only for a certain group of patients. And I think telehealth as a medium can only go so much as far in terms of consultations or establishing rapport with patients through a screen. But when it comes to actual assessments and different forms of movements or mobilizations that we usually do with patients, especially for orthopedics, that's something that has to be done in person.
In person, definitely.
So when we are working with patients in person, can there be something else that can assist and can enable? Now, remember the 3 E's or the 4 E's that we spoke about.
5 E's now. I think you got 5.
So can there be something that can enable, empower, and also extend what a biokineticist can do? And one of the innovations that's coming in from 4IR is robotics. We know we're there yet, but I think that's something that we need to keep in our horizon going forward, is that very similarly to nurses or medical doctors or surgery, or even in terms of podiatry, where there are robotics or robots being assistants to bios, or even just robots at home reminding patients of how to do a particular exercise, demonstrating the various forms of exercise prescriptions, acting as reminders to say, hey, it's an hour exercise according to the FIT principle, as we know. So it comes up, it really enables both the practitioner and the patient in terms of how you usually do things. So to answer your question, that's basically how it could potentially assist both the patient and the practitioner.
Okay, so you've just splashed out words like robotic. And in my head, I've got that 1950s image of this tin can robot standing in the house and it's going to tell you how to move that right arm to help rehab that injury you had on the rotator cuff. Is that what we're going to see?
Yes. Not maybe in the very distant future, but certainly we will. I think in first world countries, in other countries, we are starting to see robots, is a conventional term being used, being applied in various forms of treatment or even in the form of rehabilitation. As an example, the reason why we are so heavily invested in this phenomenon of 4IR research is because the University of Johannesburg has made 4IR the mandate for what we do in terms of research, teaching, and community engagement.
Okay, wow.
And we have also got a robotic dog at UJ, which is known as Spot.
Okay.
And Spot can dance, and Spot can take visitors to certain places in the university that they don't know where to go. So robotics or robots itself have skills and capabilities that they can do which are similar to humans, but they need to be trained. And how do we train them? Well, based on machine learning models. How do we get machine learning models? Based on the data to train that model. So to answer your question, robots can do virtually anything. We're now seeing in China that by 2030, they're going to be having autonomous vehicles to reduce pollution and smoke within the areas. So the whole climate change agenda. So robots can virtually do anything, but it's basically up to what you want them to do. And I think we will start to see robots from biokinetics perspective in future coming in. More so from a sports science, physical therapy perspective, because it's more of a global phenomenon. But once we see that on the physical therapy landscape, we would then see from a South African or UK perspective, say, how could we then integrate this from a biokinetics perspective in the future? So when we talk about robots, virtually anything is possible, but it's how you train that particular robot using a machine learning model or algorithm.
So, Wendy, what type of robot would you choose to be your assistant in your practice?
So I would like Spot the dog, who could take my patients for a walk as opposed to my patients taking their dog for a walk. Do you know what I mean?
There we go.
No, but I mean, that's the reality. Often, our main slogan is life through movement. And often our technicality of our very specific rehabilitation prescription is not necessarily that fancy. It's just, please, will you walk?
Yes.
So that's
and it's
why,
very basic.
Yeah,
it's
so
movement.
Or just move, at the very least. If we're seeing a patient for, let's say it's a session somewhere between 30 minutes and 60 minutes, there's only so much that can be done really in that hour. What about the other 23 hours of that day, plus the 24 hours a day, the rest of the week? We obviously can't compare. So this would be an assistant to that for the benefit of the patient. Also, we would get objective data back on what's going on with our patient. So is this prescription working or not? Now we'd have objective data in knowing, are we being effective in our rehabilitation or not? So it does work both ways. It equips and assists us. I just thought another E though is empathy.
There we go. We're on 6 now.
And another one. I've got another one.
No.
Eyeballing. And this is something, talking about the data, is
it's a Poppy X scenario going on here. Eyeballing.
So the eyeball, so for instance, if we're doing a posture analysis with a patient, we're often checking them out just with our eyeballs, right?
Yes.
We're trained in it, obviously, to do this after many, many, many postural analyses. But we're ultimately eyeballing unless you're using very specific grids or data or and I think your idea of that robot, Steve, is not necessarily far-fetched, but not necessarily what it is. Robotics is not just a tin can man saying, do this, do that. It's all forms of technology that gives you data back. So whether it's little stick-on stickers, using cameras, all the way up to your robot man, literally, physically. So it's a whole range in terms of technology that can be used.
So I'm going to add into that and say our current technology allows a lot of integration, a lot of feedback to occur. Wearables, wearable tech, cellular phones, smartphones, all of those integrate, and you're getting them to talk to each other on an ongoing basis. Anything from scales, TVs nowadays are listening to you all the time. Do we have that robotics engagement already occurring? We just need to plug in.
So from a sports science perspective, we certainly do. And one of the sectors for artificial intelligence in that area is something which is known as image recognition. So what Wendy is speaking about for posture analysis, something like that can certainly be done for posture analysis of a patient. So it doesn't have to necessarily just be with a robot, but just using your phone, if we develop an app that has capabilities of image recognition, it can detect a certain posture.
Yes.
So in biokinetics, we have a number of postural abnormalities in different planes or different angles that we look at a patient. And for example, we can train an app or an algorithm using a phone to detect lordosis, kyphosis, etc. So that's something which is based on the 4IR element, is image recognition. It's something that a biokineticist would usually do, but now using a phone, which is known as cloud computing or computational intelligence, is something that a phone, through robust forms of validations, can now tell you, this is what's happening with the patient. And for all other sorts of monitoring and analytics and tracking, not just for posture. I'll give you an example now. At the University of Johannesburg, we've developed a game. And the reason we developed this game is because a number of our students couldn't go into the lab to do various forms of skills because of lockdown. So unfortunately, in the curriculum, they were quite behind. They didn't really know how to do an EEG or a Bruce protocol test or Kinetics, etc. So we developed a game, which is a 3-dimensional game where they can now go and play this game. But this game also has like questions. So in order for them to continue in this game, they have to answer the right question and then actually do the procedure. So we're doing it for various forms of scenarios, such as shoulder isokinetics, knee isokinetics, MMTs, which is manual muscle tests.
They got to look at Steve and explain these things slowly. The biokineticist is having a good conversation that side of the table, and Steve's looking blank.
It's all like the good feels over here.
Yeah, they're all excited about this nerdy talk, and Steve doesn't know what's going on.
The gamification is something that we basically developed not just for learning and assessment, but also something that at a later stage that we can then start to integrate within practice. And the next step, and then that's the beauty of technology, is that once you develop something, you can make it better, right? So cars have evolved, various forms of technologies have evolved, and
Spaceships.
Technologies, they're also going to evolve. So the next step in this evolvement is embracing virtual reality with the game. So instead of playing the game with their phone or their laptop, they can now use virtual reality goggles. And instead of looking at the biokineticist on the screen, they are now the bio. So instead of looking at the bio, the bio doing the actual tests, which is now taking them into a virtual reality, which is not at the lab, but at their home, but being in a virtual lab.
They're experiencing exactly the same.
They're using this a lot overseas specifically, which is my keen area of interest, which is falls prevention and for the elderly and special populations. And it's been a massive improvement. So instead of getting your patients, necessarily out and about somewhere unsafe or during lockdown, they had these goggles literally delivered to homes and stuff. And it's been phenomenal. These 4D goggles, such. It's been amazing in terms of falls
virtual
prevention.
Reality experience. And absolutely. We've had one of the topics being the interns and the experience in their development in biokinetics and such. I can hear you talking about the education and how those interns, those going through the education process now have the opportunity to develop experiences where environments may be restrictive. So like I say, COVID has been a very restrictive period for learning. Theory is fine, but where's the practical when you're not allowed to engage physically with someone? And that's thrown a whole lot up in the air. And as you say, the gamification makes it a whole lot more enjoyable, one, and also real. It's real. You're looking through those glasses. What I've seen of what you've put out there, you are setting a resistance scale on an ergometer. You are checking position on...
What's an ergometer, Steve?
That's a good question. I did sell those. So I have done ergometers. That's about as far as I go. Cycloergometry. That was my background. But it's giving them that opportunity to develop and learn. So a very interesting topic going into this 4IR, AI, biokinetics, application to learning, application to rehab, application to future development, integration with technology currently. Wow, Wendy, that's a lot going on there in 20 minutes.
There's a whole can of worms. We're going to have to do this again.
I think we are.
Absolutely. Sounds good.
Yeah, Prof, I think we're going to have to go into a couple of the topics that you've mentioned. I've circled them in my book here, but we're going to have to open up I think we're going to go down a bit of a rabbit hole here of technology, opportunity, engagement, experiences, learning curves you've had. I mean, you've got to this point, but to get to there, everyone looks at it and says, oh, wow, it's so simple. But actually, it never is when you're not there. And that development process and how you got there must be super interesting as well. So we'd love to have that conversation.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for having me. It was a great chat.
Yeah, so there we go. One last question, not question. It's going to be your philosophy and guidance for any biokineticists out there. Advice on dealing with the world right now. There's always a sideways question I'm going to throw at someone. So that's your one. Go for it.
Well, it's an interesting time, especially for young bios or students. We live in a time now where there's just so much going on. There's a lot of innovations, even research that are being evolved continuously. And I think it's important that we stay abreast with what's currently happening, be open to what's out there. And even for us as experienced biokineticists, we're learning every day. The profession is growing, it's evolving, and it's making things better, especially for our patients. So the only advice I can say is be as open as possible to various forms of things. Continuously evolve, continuously go on courses, and stay abreast of the current literature and information, not just from a research and education perspective, but especially for innovation and technology, because that's really the future in terms of where we're going.
So there we go.
Hashtag the future bio.
There we go. Rightio, so there's your final bit of advice, a philosophy for achievement from our esteemed guest here today. And I'd like to say thank you very much, Habib, for all your time. People can we'll post a bio and a couple of links underneath this podcast on the website. Any questions from anyone out there, any queries, any experiences, please post them underneath in the comments. And look forward to the next episode. Thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure.
This podcast was produced by Johan Turon and the team at Soundpatch Studio, presented by yours truly, Steve Saunders. Interested in doing a podcast, drop us a message on soundpatch@me.com. That's soundpatch@me.com. As always, thanks for listening and catch you on the next podcast.